Introduction to counseling. It was easily my least favorite class in seminary. There's nothing wrong with the subject per se. In fact, I've found counseling since to be kind of riveting, like all the stuff behind it, all the stuff that goes into it. But my professor there was horrific. He showed up to class and he seemed to be bored with it himself. Like he wished he could be anywhere else, and then he would sit there and he would literally go through his slides and click them and then read his PowerPoint to us for 90 minutes. After 90 minutes of that, I needed counseling. So for the final, he had us write a paper though called, here's the topic, how do people change? And then we're to take that into a church ministry context, like how do people change? At the time, I wasn't sure that I had any real answers to that, but I had read some books, so I was regurgitating some things that I'd read. And then that night, I get home, and I'm talking about the paper with my roommate, and my roommate was 10 years older than I am. He had lived, not just 10 years older, but he had lived a lot more life than I had lived. He had lived enough to be hurt, enough to be disabused of simple answers, enough to be cynical about how church ministry could change lives. And when he heard what I was working on, he got mad, actually. And like with a really intense voice said, "Anderson, people don't really change. I mean, they might change their circumstances, they might change how they look, they might change where they live, they might change their job. But deep down, people do not really change." Now, to that point in my life, like I probably couldn't have cared less about the paper. But something about what he said made me realize that I cared deeply about this subject. I'm not even sure that I would have known this until he yelled at me. But when he did, something like broke in me. And I was like, what are you talking about? And that's when I discovered that deep down, like to my core, one of the core values of my life, core things I believe, is that people can change. That God really changes people. That deep inner transformation is possible. This isn't just something that happened back then in the Bible days, but this is something that can truly happen. That if you meet Jesus, it's not just possible, but you must be changed. To meet Jesus truly is to be changed. It's possible for us now, today. I've seen it. I've tasted it. I've committed my whole life to it. And I still believe that. 20 years later. But I've never really gotten over that conversation. Still haunted by the doubts that my roommate might just be right. Maybe people don't change, maybe I haven't changed. And I still have that thing break in me that says, no, God changes people. People really do change. Otherwise, who are we kidding? Like, why are we here? Which brings me to the subject I want to talk about today. The exciting question that my boring professor asked. Can people really change? Is deep down, inside out, identity forming life transformation, is that possible? And this brings us to the topic of Jacob. From beginning to end, Jacob's story is a story of transformation. It's a story of how God transforms a life. He takes a nobody and makes him into a nation. He takes the undeserving and makes him into the blessed, the unloved into his beloved, Jacob into Israel. So Jacob, he declares to my friend, you're wrong. People do change. But then in the same breath, he turns to me and says, and maybe you're wrong too. Maybe it's not that simple. The transformation that Jacob talks about, Jacob's experience, refuses to fit into like a simple equation or a program or 3 easy steps or 3 easy payments from 1999. Like it's a transformation that is shrouded in mystery. Like you can no more cause or control or buy it than you can cause or control or buy God. All you can do, all you must do, is submit to it, which just happens to be what Jacob and most of us are least likely to do. So our text for today is Genesis chapter 32. We're coming to the season finale. So this whole season, like this isn't the end of Jacob's life, but this is the end of his story, his season. So this is the season that is about Jacob. So ending in chapter 32, it's going to come to this end of the series and then into this season of Jacob's life where everything's focused on him. In Genesis 31, we just saw that Jacob finally decides to leave Haran. He's been living there with his uncle Laban for 20 years now. And during that time, he's amassed a huge family. He's got a couple wives, a couple living girlfriends, a bunch of kids, and who knows how many servants. And then he's also got, though, he's managed to pillage his uncle's wealth, taking from his uncle Laban an enormous amount of sheep, goats, camels, ancient Near Eastern wealth right there. When Laban, his uncle, realizes what Jacob has done, Jacob noticed that Laban's attitude changed towards him, and we read in Genesis 31, verse 2, it literally reads like this. Jacob saw Laban's face, and lo! We've heard this before. And lo! It was not disposed towards him. Laban's face looked like death. So Jacob's like, I feel like God is telling me that now is the time to leave. In the next verse, God tells him it's time to leave. And for some reason, for the first time in Jacob's life, Jacob actually listens to God. And Jacob then, so he waits until his uncle Laban is out. It's a big sheep shearing party out there. And then he takes his wives, takes his kids, takes all of his possessions and runs off to try and escape home to the promised land. At one point, you think that Laban's going to hunt him down and kill him. But the Lord shows up to Laban in a dream, warns him not to harm Jacob, and then they have this uncomfortable peace where they set up these rocks like an Ebenezer and say, okay, I promise to not cross this line if you promise to not cross this line. So Jacob is finally free from Laban, finally free from his trap, but, returning home means that he has to face his past sins. So we pick up the story in chapter 32, verse 1. Jacob also went his way. Laban went his, Jacob went his. And the angels of God met him. When Jacob saw them, he said, this is the camp of God. So they called the place Mahanaim. So Jacob's returning to the promised land, and what does he see? A camp, literally an encampment, a military encampment. He sees an army of angels. Now, let me explain. This is the ancient Near Eastern version of the poem Footprints. Have you ever heard this? Do you know this? You need to Google this. Not right now. You need to Google this. It's the story. There's this person. They have this dream one night, and they're walking on the beach with the Lord. And as they're walking, they see in the sky scenes from their life flash up in the sky. And as they walk through, they go through, and then they get to the end of their life, and they look back over their life, and they notice something. When they look at the footprints in the sand, anytime they came to the hardest parts, the deep parts, the parts that were the worst in their whole life, the saddest parts of their life, there was only one set of footprints. And they say, why, Lord? Why, when I needed you the most, did you abandon me? And the Lord says, no, I will never leave you. Those are the times I'm carrying you. That's what's happening here. Jacob assumes that he's making this journey on his own. He assumes he has to do it in his own strength, but suddenly he realizes God is going to carry me through this. He sent an entire army to go with me. I'm not on my own. There's not one camp, but there's two. Mahanaim means two camps. Verse 3, Jacob sent messengers ahead of him to his brother Esau in the land of Seir, the country of Edom. He sent messengers to Esau, Seir, Edom. This is emphasizing something here. Esau, Seir, Edom, hairy, red, Esau. Each of these names brings up something from Jacob's past. It reminds us of that moment when Jacob stole from his brother, when he sinned against his brother. And it reminds us of who his brother is, that he is this very oddly attractive, very hairy man who's really, really good at killing things and wants to kill him. So Jacob is heading back home to Esau, Seir, Edom. And he sends these messengers to Esau with a deferential message. And then over the next few verses, we see that he promises to send these gifts to him. And in verse 6, we pick up the text. When the messengers returned to Jacob, they said, we went to your brother Esau, and now he is coming to meet you, with 400 men are with him. He's coming to meet you, and he's brought an army. And so suddenly we see, now we see why Jacob needs a military escort to make it home safely, right? In great fear and distress, Jacob divided the people who were with him into two groups, and the flocks and the herds and the camels as well. He thought if Esau comes and attacks one, the group that is left may escape. So he's terrified. He's dividing the people up, coming up with a plan. Well, at least everyone doesn't have to die when he attacks us. And then Jacob does something that is most unexpected for Jacob, something extraordinary. He decides to pray. Then Jacob prayed, "O God of my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac, Lord, you who said to me, 'Go back to your country and to your relatives, and I will make you prosper.' I am unworthy of all the kindness and faithfulness you have shown your servant. I had only my staff when I crossed this Jordan, but now I have become two camps. Save me, I pray, from the hand of my brother Esau." It is amazing what a little fear will do for your prayer life. So after this, Jacob, he divides up his people and starts sending all these lavish gifts ahead of him to meet Esau before they get there. And then the whole thing, this goes for verse after verse. He's sending these lavish gift after lavish gift, hoping to soften up Esau, and it's all explained in verse 20. It reads like this: "For he thought, I will pacify him with these gifts I am sending on ahead. Later, when I see him, perhaps he will receive me." That word pacify, translated pacify, is usually translated atone. In almost every other context, it is used to describe someone coming to the temple, someone coming to God, someone who's sinned, and that offers a blood sacrifice on their behalf so that they can come before God. Here, we see that Jacob realizes returning home means facing his past sins, means making atonement. So Jacob's gifts went on ahead of him, but he himself spent the night in camp. Now here, we need to call a timeout. This has all been preparing us for this moment. So what we're about to read, this section we're about to enter into right here, is one of the great stories of faith. It rightly belongs alongside like Abraham sacrificing Isaac, God parting the Red Sea, Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead. I mean, this is one of the greats. But I have to warn you, if you come to this text and demand a clear, rational, modern, historical, literal explanation for everything, it will literally sound like nonsense to you. This text defies and even mocks such a reading. It's kind of like Genesis chapter 2, where we talk about Adam and Eve, and it says, "And they walked with God in the cool of the evening." Now, if you ask me, like, what does it literally mean for a man and a woman to walk with a God who is omnipresent in spirit in the cool of the evening, I would slap you. What does it mean? Like, you don't literally try and explain this, but you know exactly what it means. You know exactly what, even if you haven't experienced it, you know what that means. That's how you got to read this text. It is not incidental that this scene takes place at night. Everything is hidden, obscured, hard to see, hard to make out. To drag this text into the light of day or into the fluorescent lights of modern critical scholarship is to render it meaningless. To dissect it is to kill it. Now, I'm not saying this text is meaningless or irrational, but I am saying that the God of Jacob, the God of the Bible, the God of reality, by definition, is beyond comprehension. In Hebrew, he's too wonderful. He's beyond human understanding, that words born in time and space cannot describe or contain this God. All we can know him as, well, he's the I am. So, the mark of a real encounter with this God is mystery. The mark that you really did meet this God is that it takes place at night, in hiddenness. It's not something you can ultimately put into words. So yes, the story is shrouded in mystery. It makes no sense if you attempt to rationally explain it at all. But isn't that exactly what you'd expect if this were recording a real encounter with the God of the universe? That said, verse 22, that night Jacob got up, took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all of his possessions. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled him till daybreak. So the Jabbok is this east-west tributary from the Jordan River going into the Promised Land, and it literally cuts down, goes from up high elevation down low, so it cuts into the landscape. It's this deep scar in the landscape that literally marks an ancient boundary line. So Jacob is about to go into the Promised Land, and he's about to go in, and he's all alone, and a man wrestles him. A man. So remember Genesis chapter 28 when the Jacob's ladder scene, it says that Jacob came to a place. Just a place. Like any place, like 1,000 places that he's been before, a place. And that the text itself is like super obscure on this. In the same way, when he comes here, he just wrestles a man. And the word translated wrestle here, it sounds almost identical to Jacob's name. So the text literally reads like, and Jacob came to the Jabbok, and he met a man who Jacobed him all night. Jacob came to the Jabbok, and a man Jacobed him all night. That's the sense. It's like the narrator wants us to hear, wants Jacob to hear, Jacob, Jacob, Jacob. Wants us to remember what it means to be Jacob, to be a deceiver, to be a grasper, to be a heel, to be a backstabber, to remember who he is. So let's put this together. It's night. Imagine this. It's night. You're all alone. This encounter is going to take place without any possessions to protect you, without anyone to hide behind or blame. It's just you and a man wrestling all night. Now, I don't want to just read ourselves into this passage. This is a story about Jacob, not necessarily about us. But similar to chapter 28, when Jacob shows up to a place, the text invites you to ask, have you ever been to that place before? And in the same way, this text invites us to ask, have you ever experienced this? Have you ever found yourself unable to sleep, restless, fighting with someone you can't see? When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. So Jacob is born to wrestle. Like literally, he's wrestling his brother in the womb. He is incredibly strong or incredibly strong-willed, likely both. Can't really tell. But whatever the case is, he refuses to submit. Like all night long, he will not give up. He will not surrender. This goes all night till the man's like, okay, we're going to do this then. And he touches his hip. Jacob refuses to submit, so he gets broken. God touched him at the point of his greatest strength and took it from him and literally maimed him for life. Then the man said, let me go, for it is daybreak. This is almost certainly means you can't see me or you're going to die. To which Jacob says, I will not let you go unless you bless me. Like I'd rather die than let you go. Then the man asked, what is your name? Now this is not a question. He's not asking for information. He's asking for a confession. We could word this, who are you really? Where do you find your identity? Who do you think you are? Jacob, he answered, I'm a liar. I'm a deceiver. I'm a guy with a past. I'm a guy who ruins every relationship I've ever been in. I am Jacob. Then the man said, your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome. That is not who you are. That's who you were. And he declares over him, your name will be Israel. Why? Because you have overcome God and men. You have overcome God. But notice how Jacob wins in this text. How does Jacob get the victory? By being broken, by confessing, and then desperately clinging to God, even if it means his own death. That's how he wins. That's how he's blessed. That's how he is transformed. Jacob said, please tell me your name. But he replied, why do you ask me my name? Like, do you really not know? And then he blessed him there. The word blessed can also mean just say goodbye. We think in this text, he already blessed him when he did the name change. We think he said, just like, hey, be blessed. And he was out of there. And then in the light of day, Jacob is now it's finally all coming together. What just happened? So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, it is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared. I just wrestled God. It wasn't just a man. The sun rose above him as he passed Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. Therefore, to this day, the Israelites do not eat the tendon attached to the socket of the hip, because the socket of Jacob's hip was touched near the tendon. Now, this is fascinating and a bit odd the way the Israelites memorialize this in the meat department of Wegmans. But before we watch Jacob, remember, this is just the interlude before he goes to meet Esau to face his past. Before Jacob's going to limp off and go face his past, let's talk. This story is the story of how God attacks Jacob, maims him for life, and transforms him forever. How God attacks Jacob, maims him for life, in order to bless him. Which brings us back to that question. Can people change? How do people change? How did Jacob get changed in this? Does this say anything about how we might experience transformation with God? Does this say anything about transformational encounters with the God of the universe? And I want us to reflect. This is a deep, mysterious passage. All of you, I encourage you to chew on this for years to come. But I just want to point out 4 things in this passage. The first is this. God brings Jacob to a crossroads. We talked about this a few weeks ago in chapter 28. I introduced you to the term liminal or liminal space or liminality. It's that transition when you're between thresholds. You're neither here nor there. You're neither who you were, yet you're not quite sure who you're going to be. And this is where we find Jacob. And this is where God finds Jacob. Transformation takes place at dawn. It's neither night nor day. He's leaving his old life, yet not yet started his new life. He's literally at the border between 2 lands on the Jabbok. He's alone, stripped of everything, without family or possessions. He has nothing to hide behind. He must face his past before he can move into his future. He's forced to confess who he has been in order to find out who God is calling him to be. Not always, but almost always. This is where we meet God. In weakness, in vulnerability, in transition, in that space when we're no longer sure who we are or who we will be. Now, sometimes these life transformations, sometimes they're planned, and sometimes they come to you like a man attacking you in the middle of the night. However this moment comes to you, as we pointed out a few weeks ago, what makes the difference in this moment is recognizing God's presence. What makes the difference in this moment at the crossroads is meeting God there. It's the difference between struggling in your own strength and desperately clinging to God. Number 2, God breaks the power of his old identity and imposes a new one on him. I want you to hear this. This is big in our world today. So the Hebrew scholar Robert Hamilton points out that line, "Your name will no longer be," that line right there is and I'm quoting, a divine pronouncement formula that indicates a spiritual metamorphosis is taking place. So he isn't just giving him a nickname. He's not just saying, "Oh, I think I can see this in you." He's saying, this is who you are. The God who speaks, the Genesis, God who speaks things into existence, who speaks reality into existence, just said, "No, this is who you are." Now, this is something. Our world is ruled by identity politics. There is a pop culture dogma that states, "I alone can determine my identity. I alone can say who I am. My chosen identity has real political power in our world, and you must affirm it or be canceled or sued or protested." This idea has real power in our world today. This idea has so much power that it's the type of thing that the Apostle Paul would speak of in Ephesians 6 when he talks about an authority, a power of this dark world, a spiritual force that demands allegiance and threatens all who dare not submit. But this text upends all that. So the whole world might bow down to the gods of personal identity. You might boldly speak your truth and the whole world have to affirm you in it. But God, he will not bow down. He doesn't consult Jacob. He will not affirm him. Instead, he imposes upon him a new identity. He tells him who he is. And it's not like Jacob didn't fight. That's what this scene is about, right? I'm a Jacob. I'm not going to change for anyone. Not for any man or for God. I will fight you all night. That's what he's doing. Jacob was so committed to being a Jacob that he fought God, and that's what's happening. He refuses to submit. So God, what's he do? He has to break him. Literally maim the man before he'll stop fighting, before he's ready to receive his new identity. And in this, we begin to see that this crossroads is not just about what Jacob thought it was about. Jacob thought this crossroads was about what he's facing externally, about all the external dangers, about, oh, when I go home, I have to face Esau and all the dangers out there. That's what he thought it was about. But God forces him to face the real issue. Jacob has been living an identity of his own construction. Jacob has been believing his own lies. Jacob believes that he is a Jacob. That's all he is, that he is a deceiver, a heel. That's who I am because that's who I've always been. That's what I've always had to do in order to survive because that's who I've always been. As long as I can remember, that's who I am. I am Jacob. But this Jacob is not welcome in the promised land. Jacob cannot enter the kingdom of God. That self-constructed identity may not come in. Before he can enter God's kingdom, the power of his identity must be broken, and he must confess and receive his God-given identity. Do you hear this? This experience has been called by many names. Throughout the scriptures, you'll find things like dying to self, being crucified with Christ, putting off the old you, being found, being made new, getting saved, adopted into sonship, or more modern terms, hitting the wall, the dark night of the soul, having an identity crisis. Whatever you call it, it's a journey that we all must go through if we follow Jesus. If we want to be in relationship with the God of Jacob, we have to have this reckoning. It's a reckoning between God and yourself. It's facing the reality that you have been believing your own lies. It's being confronted with the fact that the real problem is not out there. It's in here. So, you may or may not relate to Jacob's personal identity. I don't necessarily relate to him. But if you spent more than 5 minutes reflecting on your own identity, who you think you are, surely you've realized at some point that who you are, or who you think you are, is a response to hurt, to shame, to wanting to be loved for all the wrong things, to the way your family of origin put expectations on you. You know that, right? All the things you call personality, all the things that you just say, this is who I am, is it really who you are? Or is that how you respond because they always did that to you, or because you always wanted to be this person, or because you always felt like you had to do that in order to be loved? It's not who we've had to become in order to that identity, that idea, that mechanism, the thing that we so often call personality, is not really who we are. It's a protective mechanism. It's who we've become in order to survive, but it's not from God necessarily. And it's not the you that God is inviting into his kingdom. In order to enter into his kingdom, you have to understand your God-given identity. Number 3. God's blessing is found on the other side of brokenness. So in this story, the blessing is the transformation. They're one and the same. Blessing, transformation, same thing. So the blessing will not come until God breaks Jacob. And that's the turning point. When he loses his strength, when he's completely broken, then and only then can he receive the blessing, become a new person, enter into the promised land. Blessing is on the other side of brokenness. So I've never really liked pastors. It's really unfortunate considering my profession. But pastors, like, they always act like they know everything. You're like, really? I'm always like, really? You became an expert on life just because of that intro to counseling class you took? Really? Okay, there's a lot of nice pastors. I know some. But mega church pastors are the worst. They're so sincere and they're so great, and you think they pull on your heartstrings, and then they end up in the headlines, and you're like, oh. So I've become kind of cynical about pastors in general, as many of you have, as you've told me. But through all this, there's one pastor, there's one mega church pastor, believe it or not, who I've always liked and always respected. You know who it is? Matt Chandler. I don't know if you guys know him. He's worth checking out. Here's why I like Matt. Because about 15, 20 years ago, Matt got brain cancer. Not just brain cancer, the type of brain cancer that people don't survive from. And he spent years, chemo, surgery, devastated, years wondering if he was any day was going to be his last, years wondering if he was ever going to see his daughter graduate from kindergarten, that type of thing. Miraculously, he survived. And here's the thing. All those temptations of other megachurch pastors, all those things about your personal brand and having super expensive sneakers and building your own personal kingdom, there's something about cancer, something about being completely broken, about having nothing to cling to except God, that changed Matt. And all those temptations that megachurch pastors face, they just seem ridiculous to Matt. That's why I like him. That's why I respect him. Now, of course, if that's what it takes to become a truly great pastor, I might prefer to be mediocre. But that's it, isn't it? I mean, everybody says they want to be blessed. Everybody says they want to be like, oh, I want to live the life that Jesus wants me to live, and I want to be transformed. But what if this kind of blessing is only found on the other side of brokenness? What if that greatness is only when you let go of everything you know and everything you think you have and everything you think you control? What if you can only find it when there's nothing else to cling to but God? Do you really want to be transformed? So God has wrenched me really twice in my life. And all I can say about those two experiences is one, that without that breaking, I never would have realized, much less changed. I never could have become the person I am now without those. Number two, I pray to God it never happens again. And that brings me to my last point. The God of Jacob is not safe. So why is Jacob here? Why is he at the Jabbok right now? Why is he at this crossroads in his life? Because he obeyed God. God told him to go, so he went. In fact, just before this, he prays literally the longest prayer in the entire book of Genesis. Like he's finally, for the first time in his life, it looks like he's trying to follow God. It looks like he's doing the right thing. So what does God do when Jacob obeys and prays and does the right thing? He shows up, puts him in a chokehold, and maims him for life. A number of years ago, a commentary came out called Jesus Calling. You may have heard of it. It's one of those like super popular ones at this. It's still super popular. It's like one of the super mega brands now where like you can get like Jesus Calling for dads, Jesus Calling for vegans, for Eagle fans, for whatever. Every type of Jesus Calling book you ever want, you can find it now. You know the type. Probably got the t-shirt in my office. At any rate, I've checked it out. I thought, okay, this is super popular. I should know something about this. So I checked it out, and generally, I'm a fan. I see why so many find comfort and hope in these daily devotionals. But here's my critique on not just Jesus Calling, but almost every modern devotional these days. I'm a little suspicious for just simply this one reason. The Jesus you find in Jesus Calling would never attack you in the middle of the night and maim you. He might tickle you. He might wrestle you into a hug. But this God of Jacob stuff, you're not going to find it in there. Like, can you imagine Jacob? Like, he's sitting there at the Jabbok. He just finishes praying, so he pulls out his Jesus Calling. He starts reading it, and it's like, oh, Jesus affirms me for who I am. He loves me. And then he closes it, and then Jesus actually shows up and beats the tar out of him. Now, again, I'm not anti-Jesus Calling. I'm not, with this caveat. Jacob should never read Jesus Calling until he's broken. You should never read Jesus Calling until you've been broken. Now, if you've been broken, it's going to be rich and beautiful and comforting. You're going to discover what Isaiah means when he talks about Jesus, a bruised reed he will never break and a smoldering wick he'll never snuff out, because Jesus is so, so, so gentle with those who are broken. But he will Jacob the Jacobs. He will crush the hard-hearted. He will break those who've refused to surrender. Jacob will not be won over by God's kindness. He will not be changed by God's promises. He will not be wooed by God's love. Jacob, like most of us, must be wrestled into a transformed life. He must be forced into submission. He must be broken. That's the only way he'll be blessed. It's the only way he'll surrender, being Jacob, and become Israel. Now this is not safe. This is not comfortable. This is not gentle. And in many ways, in our culture today, this is just not okay. So in a secular age, evil and suffering, they've been conflated. Like, people think of them as one thing. So when you erase the God of Jacob from our cultural story, and you erase him literally from our Christian devotionals even, when you can no longer find the God of Jacob, then the highest good, the summum bonum in life, gets boiled down to whatever causes the least possible suffering. That's progress. That's the human vision. That's what we're all about. That's the closest thing you're going to find to a universal truth out there. If we just limit suffering, that's as much as we can do. That's our great hope. But here, in the scriptures, we meet an all-holy, all-loving, all-good God who inflicts suffering in order to bless Jacob. This God is not safe. If he must attack you in order to transform you, he will. If he has to maim you for life in order to bless you, he will. He does not play by my rules. He does not affirm me when I speak my truth. Instead, he breaks me of all this until all I can do is cling to him. And that's what he does to Jacob. So broken and blessed, Jacob is now ready to meet his past sins, ready to enter the promised land. And we see this. Jacob looked up, and there was Esau coming with his 400 men. So he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the two servants. And he put the female servants and their children in front, and Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph in the rear. He himself went on ahead and bowed down to the ground 7 times as he approached his brother. But Esau ran to meet him, Jacob, and embraced him, threw his arms around his neck, kissed him, and they wept. By God's grace, Esau's heart has been softened. He has no need for vengeance. His anger's faded. He's just overwhelmed at seeing his brother. And Jacob is finally humbled. He bows to the ground 7 times. He honors his brother with his words and his actions. Later in this text, he's actually going to insist that Esau take the blessing. You take the blessing, by which he means this extravagant gift that he's giving him, but by which he also means, I stole the blessing from you. Here, take it back. Take it back. Jacob is a changed man, I think. There's something different. I mean, not just in his walk, but in his very self. And yet, the scene ends like this. Esau is so excited to see his brothers. So he says, come back to Seir with me. Come back with me. He's like, oh no, I can't. We can't keep up. We got all these children with us. And he's like, okay, well, meet me back there. Come. I want you to be with me again. And he's like, great. I'll do that. I will get there as soon as we can. And so Esau takes off, and then Jacob goes the other way. He lies. Can people really change? Is deep inside-out identity forming life transformation possible in this world? And Jacob wants to say, yes, with an asterisk. Yes, with an asterisk. And that is why this is a great story. Because it's true. This is what lived experience with God actually looks and feels like. This is why the story belongs among the greats in our text. You can be transformed truly, he says, but not completely. You can be a different person, but not perfectly. You can be changed, but God's not done with you yet. So transformation is marked by these crossroads, by these moments when you meet God. And the God of Jacob will not allow the old you, the you that you've constructed on your own, the you that you just used to protect yourself or to win people's love or approval. He will not allow that you to enter into his kingdom. It must be transformed. We, like Jacob, if we refuse to surrender, he will break us if that's what it takes. And when we're broken, we'll be forced to stop depending on our own strength and start clinging to him. And that's when we get God's blessing. That's when we find who we really are. That's when we're ready to enter God's kingdom. But the story ends like this. It's not the end. That's the beginning of a new journey. That's just the beginning of a new journey in which you learn to walk with a limp. One in which you learn to lean on God's strength, not your own. in this life, you can be transformed truly, but not completely. So for those of you ready for a challenge, or at least sick of just having a blah of relationship with God, here's my invitation. You cannot cause or control or purchase your transformation. You can't do it. Not going to happen. But you can learn to stop fighting God. You can learn to start clinging to him. You can learn to start recognizing him when he's at work. So here's an exercise that I want to help you on your journey. When I taught a course at Eastern, I would have the students do this exercise, and I required of them 8 hours to do the exercise. But you guys are advanced students, so 3 to 5. Actually, I just think you're too busy. 3 to 5. 3 to 5 hours. I want you to set aside 3 to 5 hours to get off on your own. That means no people, no technology, none. Nothing to distract you, just old school, you, God, Bible, journal. And I want you to pray this. 2 things. 1, I want you to pray, God, help me remember all the major crossroads in my life. Help me to see what was happening in my soul. Help me to see how you were working in that. Help me to face the truth about those crossroads, what you were doing there in that time with me. And then I want you to write down whatever God reveals to you at that time. And then if you still have time, that might take 3 to 5 hours right there. I want you to pray this. God, where am I tempted to construct my own identity? To put my identity on something other than you, rather than believe what you say about me? God, where do I find my identity in things other than you? What would happen if you took this away from me? Again, write down whatever God reveals to you, and if you want extra credit, you take whatever God reveals to you this, and you go to a trusted friend, and you actually share it with them. Say, here's what I think God said to me in this time. Now, if you don't do this, no worries. You are not a failure. Maybe you're just not ready. Maybe you're too busy. I understand. It's okay. This is only an invitation. You are free to wait around for God to start the conversation. I just find that it tends to go a lot less violently if you start it. Let's pray. Father, oh God, we want to be people who are transformed. And God, we're like Jacob. We're afraid of pain. We're afraid of giving up ourselves. We're afraid of all the things that we've depended on our whole lives, Lord. We're afraid of letting go of those. I pray that you'll be gentle and gracious with us, but also that you'll love us enough to break us if that's what's required. God, for those who have been broken in here, I pray that this will be a word of encouragement, that you love them, that you're with them, that the breaking was not against them, but was for them. And those who have not yet been broken, Lord, I pray that you'll prepare them now. And God, for those who are in the middle of it, oh God, be gracious to them. Let them meet Jesus. Let them see your face. And pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.